Ronnie liked to talk. He was no bragger. He didn't need no sympathy, none of that stuff, but after several shots of whiskey, when he was a little tipsy, at that point in time, Ronnie Van Zant looked for sympathy or attention. And so something would bring it up. He said, I don't think I'm gonna live to be 29.
October 20th, 1977. Gene Odom lost his best friend, and the world lost the leader of the hugely popular Southern rock band, Lynyrd Skynyrd.
We weren't happy with this airplane.
Pilot say everything's good, let's go. If it's your time to go, it's your time to go.
Gene came back and told us to buckle up. You know, we were going to try to put it down. And then some people panicked, and it got a little tense, and
we started clipping trees, and then it went bang, 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 and that's all I remember.
The plane crash in Gillsburg, Mississippi killed Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, Cassie Gaines, Dean Kilpatrick, pilot Walter McCreary, and co-pilot William Gray. Gene Odom, the band's security guard and Van Zant's lifelong friend and fishing buddy, survived the crash, and along with several others, including Leslie Hawkins, the lead backup singer, and Craig Reed, the band's guitar tech. They shared their stories of the 72 hours leading up to the crash and its aftermath. This is a tribute, a celebration, a reminder that I'll never forget you.
Ronnie lived on this side of Woodcrest, and I lived on that side of Woodcrest. But we still grew up together and playing ball and riding bikes, running around, you know, and fishing buddies. We loved to fish.
Yeah, he was always with Ronnie when I saw him, and they were such good friends and always fishing buddies.
And we didn't know how to fish back then because a lot of times we would lose them because the line owner and the Zebcos just couldn't handle some of them big old bass. But we caught thousands of them, and we really got into it. But what Ronnie Van Zant always wanted was an old truck. He wanted a trophy bass. And April or May of that year, whatever, he got him that old 55 Chevy truck. This was May of '77. He called me and said, man, let's go fishing. Come pick me up. We'll go to the lake. We started fishing. He was in the front of the boat. I was in the back of the boat, paddling, whatever. And he had a purple 9-inch monster worm. He threw it in his man old eelgrass, and that worm hit the water. When it hit the water, I said, there's your trophy bass, son. Set the hook and keep him out of that grass. I got him and I rolled that big old bass over in the boat. Ronnie Van Zant, I thought he was going to swamp the boat. Jonah screaming, my God, just look at this, and grabbed me. Hey, man, Gene, this is it, man. And I said, no doubt. Let's go weigh it. So we went and weighed it. It weighed 12 pounds, 8 ounces. That was his trophy bass. And he got that bass back from the taxidermy just before the plane crash. So he did get the two things he wanted. He wanted that old truck and he wanted the big bass, and he got those. I'm mighty proud that I was with him in that boat that day that he got that big old bass.
Alan and Bob were in my English class in school. And those guys were the funniest too. If you saw one, you saw the other. And they're always, pulling tricks and stuff. Alan sat behind me in English class, and then Bob sat behind Alan. So Bobby was always beating on the back of his chair. And then Alan was playing with my hair. I had real long hair. Linda, you got a pencil? He was always bugging me for pencils, paper, you name it. He was ready. He was ready because of me. Ronnie, he was one of a kind. He was great. Everybody loved him. I was here to hear 1%. Oh, it was great. I mean, everybody, all the people from school, we were all out here and everybody dancing and having a good time. They loved him, they loved him. And we just knew he was going to do something, and he sure did.
He worked at his brother-in-law's auto parts store, Morris Auto Supply. We're over on University and Beach Boulevard. And Ronnie became the manager of that store, and I went there parts running. And this was summer of '69. Back then, if stores sold so much, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of stock, they would get an all-expense paid vacation somewhere, whatever it was that year. That year it was Honolulu, Hawaii. Bill gave the 2 free tickets, all expense paid, Honolulu to Lacey. Sister wouldn't fly. Ronnie Van Zant hated to fly. He wouldn't fly. Donnie and Johnny and the other kids were just too young. So Lacey asked me, "You want to go to Honolulu on an all expense paid week's vacation?" I went, "Yeah, man." We went to Honolulu, Hawaii, all expense paid vacation. Came back home. My draft papers was in the mailbox. I was drafted in May of 1969. Everybody was getting drafted. We knew Ronnie wouldn't be because he was 4F. And all of his friends, my friends, our friends, they all got drafted. And I went going through a basic training and went through artillery training in Oklahoma and expecting to go to Vietnam. And then my orders come down and I was sent to Germany. And so, fantastic. When I got there, the night I got there, the officer was checking my records. "Yeah, you're gonna be in A battery." "Oh, they like to fight. Them people like to get drunk and fight." I said, "I don't drink, but I like to fight, so I'll be right at home." Then he was flipping on me. He said, "You're a welder." I said, "Yeah, I'm a union iron worker. I'm a welder." He said, "Man, our welder died yesterday. I'm battalion maintenance. You're gonna be the new welder." I went, "Wow, the best job in the world. Pull no duty." Within 13 months, I was an E5, Spec 5. So I went from welder to parts runner, and I loved both of them, I would always get things done when I go DX parts. It was something we needed because everything was going to Vietnam. You couldn't get parts. I'd go out there and talk to the sergeant there and say, "Man, I need to get this off of the truck." So I'd hustle parts and get things fixed. And so the black warrant officer said, "Before you get out of here, we like what you do." He said, "We'll give you Staff Sergeant E6 today and $10,000 VRB, variable reenlistment bonus, and guarantee you in 3 years you'll be a warrant officer if you re-enlist." I said, "No, sir. I'm a free bird. I like to go fishing. I don't want to be tied down like this." And I was going, the biggest mistake of my life was not doing that. And the second biggest mistake of my life was going to work for the band. And so if I'd have stayed in the Army, I'd have been an officer, but I wouldn't have been with my buddy when he passed away, So, God has, they say he has reasons for everything, and he don't tell you what they are.
I was the first one hired, and I was leader of the girls. I got hired probably in November before we started rehearsals in December. Then Cass and Joe came in to audition, and it worked, so wasn't much to it. Started rehearsing, and there you go. We did our first gig right about New Year's in London.
People say, how did you get involved with them? I said, it's like weird. It was just like I was just put there, It was like I had a 10-minute window to meet this band, and I kind of hit it. I was just right there when I needed to be. It was crazy, I was checking into a hotel with some lady. I just got divorced from one and, going right into another one. And we went into a hotel, and as I was checking in, the lady said that the Who were staying in the rooms joining me. And I went, "The Who and a Holiday Inn in Kent," right. So I went around there, and here's 2 roadies unloading a U-Haul trailer, pulled by a Ford Econoline van, obviously not the Who. And I says, "Hey, y'all, playing here in the hotel?" And they goes, "We're Lynyrd Skynyrd." And I had never heard of them at that time. He said, "We just got off tour with the Who." And I go, "Oh, well, that's where they came from." So they, Alan and Billy and Gary stuck their head around and told the roadies to ask them if I had some weed, which I did. So that kind of was how I met them. And so I was partying with them the weekend, and they just just kind of got along with them. And I was a mechanic, so I'm kind of mechanically inclined, and they were working around, and I just kind of fitted in, and Ed figured they could train me, to set up drums, So that's what I did. And Ed said he wanted to hire me, and Ronnie said, "The Yankee?" He says, "He's a fucking Yankee, And he said, he was a nice guy, but, there's people that I would rather hire than some Yankee, And so he told Ed if that didn't work out, he was going to kick his ass, I think they were looking for kind of like a street person like I was, that could, manipulate whatever they needed, because that's kind of what I was doing. So I kind of furnished them. And I remember the first show I did in San Diego, California, we opened up for Dave Mason. And after I got done setting up the drums and tearing down the drums, because we were opening the opening act, I went out and picked up women and drugs out of the audience and brought them backstage. So that was kind of my job.
I actually didn't party when we were at home. I didn't hang out with anybody. I had 2 kids. They were 11 and 12 at the time of the crash. So when we came home, I went home and came out when we went again, or if we had to rehearse or whatever, which after the initial rehearsal period, there wasn't a whole lot of that. Ronnie knew what he wanted when we came in, we put it together, and there you go. And we did a lot of things together. We had dinners and food fights, and there was just a lot that went on, It was just every day was pretty crazy. I remember Billy got locked out in the hall without his clothes one night. That was Dean and Leon threw somebody in his room, and he came out screaming and cussing at Leon with nothing but his boots on, and they locked him out of his room. There were things like that. There were probably not real funny to other people, but, they were pretty funny from a distance, which is where I was. It did get old being thrown out, but we got thrown out of some really nice places. It was just always something going on, you know what I mean?
Throwing TVs in the pool from the 10th floor while they're plugged in. We would go get an extension cord so it was on when it hit the pool. You get attempted murder or something these days for that stuff, I mean, we take the fire hose down and go down and stick it under somebody's door and go turn it on. Soak the whole floor. Have to pay for all the carpet and all that. That was insane. We got thrown out of every hotel in Denver, Salt Lake City, Kansas City, St. Louis, London.
Another time in London, we had been there and somebody had a row with a carny. There was a carny convention going on, and somebody got in a row about that. And first thing you know, Artemis and Gary are breaking into the convention room and wanted to have a fight with the carnies. Oops, wrong room, with the police boxing league. So that didn't turn out too well, so we had to leave another nice hotel.
As long as I could party, anybody in the band, that was kind of what was going on. We were allowed to do it as long as we performed when we were supposed to. We could do anything we wanted to do, which was kind of, you're teetering on the edge there, So, yeah, you couldn't get away with that stuff these days that we did. You would be thrown in prison. I was pretty bad. I mean, as a professional roadie, I wouldn't consider myself. I was 26 years old when the plane crashed, and I was just a professional partier that happened to do guitars as far as I'm concerned, But, when the plane crashed, it was weird because people wanted Lynyrd Skynyrd's guitar tech, and that was like me, and I was like far from being professional, as far as I was concerned. But it's kind of cool because I've worked for Lynyrd Skynyrd, Journey, and Foreigner, so I was the guitar tech for 3 bands that are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I don't even play guitar.
It was winter of '76. He called me up. He says, let's go get something to eat, whatever. Me and Judy's gonna come out and pick you up. And he says, you want to do this? I want you to be my bodyguard and get us straightened up. Get us off this stuff. Get us out. And I'm not sure I want to be a part of this
Gene was like Ronnie's best friend. From childhood, I'd heard stories about Gene from Ronnie, and Ronnie and I got pretty close before Gene got involved. So he had told me stories about the Odom family and how rowdy they were, and then it was weird because then when Gene came in, Gene didn't do any drugs and didn't ever smoke a pot or drink liquor or nothing. So he was kind of.
I'll never do it. I've never drank, never done drugs, never will. I take heart medicine, stuff like that, prescription medicine for my heart. But I've never smoked a cigarette, never tasted alcohol. So he says, okay, he says, let's do this summer tour. Let's and you just go out there and do what you can do, and let's think about this. Let's talk about this. But I want you to work for me. I want you to take care of us. I want you to get us off of this crap. So I did.
So I really didn't know him that well, other than, coming and going. He was with Ronnie a lot, and I knew that he had been friends with Ronnie for years.
Yeah, Gene was kind of like, I don't know, I guess today, like maybe LeBron James, when he brings his posse on, and they kind of travel with him, and that's kind of like what Ronnie wanted to bring some of his childhood friends, into the situation,
I knew him. We were there together. He was just throwing people off stage that didn't belong and, trying to do his job, and we were trying to do our job. But who he was having to focus on were the people that had a big drug and alcohol problem.
Yeah, Gene Ronnie brought Gene in just as another pair of eyes, just kind of like, hey, Gene, just kind of blend in, look around, tell me what you see, And so he did, kind of going, saw what I did, what Chuck, Raymond, Joe Barnes, Kevin, just kind of went around and checked out what was going on, and then went back and reported to his buddy Ronnie what was happening, And there was a lot of information came around. I kind of was insider for Ronnie, he'd say, hey, if you see anything going on, let me know, I mean, this is a working machine kind of thing, and if there's a loose cog, let's fix it, and if I don't know about it, we can't fix it. Let's work together as a team and get in there and go, and that's kind of what we did. Is Ronnie wanted to clean it up, but he needed to look in the mirror and clean himself up too, because he was bitching about people drinking while he was drunk,
At the time Gene came in, there were a lot of problems that were from excessive alcohol and just kind of, you get bored, you go off the deep end, and there had been a lot of that going on for a long time, and Alan was starting to have trouble with numbness in his hands, and, it was just kind of getting out of hand, and it was either tighten up for longevity, or it would be, live hard, die young, and that was going to be the fate of the band pretty much. Ronnie felt like if it didn't get straightened out. It was just trying to keep everybody headed in a better direction. So that was Gene's job. Just kind of tighten it up, stay on track, or I'll beat you, Not really, but you know what I mean.
And to start out, I would go to the show early, take a taxi or limousine over, and they would always be whiskey and booze. I started taking bottles, putting them in towels, wrapping them up, putting them and hiding them, and giving them to security or giving them to people so they wouldn't be in there when the band come in and the crew, all this liquor. And the crew come in to get a few drinks, and when the band come in, they was so I weaned them off of the alcohol to a certain point. And Ronnie, the drugs. He said, the drugs will be next. He says, this is going to be a little more difficult than the liquor thing that you're doing. I think you're doing a good job. He said, Anaheim, California, 93,000 people. They co-headlined with Peter Frampton on two shows there, one day and the next day. Ronnie and Alan and Gary come walking down the hallway toward me. Ronnie grabbed me. He said, man, he said, There's 93,000 people out there, and we just kicked their butts sober. We're all sober. Thanks to you, Gene. Keep it up, man. And Gary and I'm like, yeah, man, you're doing great. You know, they might have had a drink, but they wasn't drunk.
Some different reactions. Sometimes everybody liked Gene. It wasn't that, you know, there was any problem as far as personality or anything. There were some people that were a little disgruntled about not as much alcohol around, and I heard the word babysitter used a couple of times. They didn't like having a babysitter, but you know, it's like sometimes appreciated, sometimes not.
He took his job. That's what I'm supposed to do, you know, and he did it well. You know, whether people liked it or not, he was there and he was going to protect him, no matter what. Not just Ronnie, the whole band. You know, he was good at that.
You know, and everybody had their job. Ron did this and that, and then Dean Kilpatrick kind of kept Ronnie's, you know, did more personal things, and then Gene just came in like a, you know, a watchdog. So, you know, sometimes the dog's happy and sometimes he's not. And
when they were getting clean, and that was Gene's main job, you know, to keep those boys clean, especially Ronnie. And they were all happy and excited, and, you know, everything was going right.
October 17th, 77, we were rooming together on that tour because we were setting everything up. We needed to talk, and so he didn't want to be wandering around different rooms. So they had lined up the autograph session, album signing at the Altamont Mall there, Tower Records, I believe it was. Ronnie was laying in his bed. I say at a budget meeting, tour schedule coming up, and you doing the budget. I said, what happens when you all are all sitting around the table to do the budget and everything's set? He said, what do you mean? I said, when you're sitting there at the table, before you and Gary sign the checks, what happens? What goes on? And I don't understand what you're talking about. We just have a meeting. We talk about the budget and everything. I say there's a lot of liquor, and there's a lot of cocaine, a lot of drugs. By the time you sign the check, you're drugged out, you're drunk, you're tipsy, and you listen to everything he's saying. Just sign it.
There was a lot of money being made. They were superstars, and the money should have been a lot more. I mean, there was good money, but it took a while for them to get that.
Ronnie was most certain there were going to be changes. Everybody knew that.
I feel that he's robbing you. And he said, man, I'm just not sure, Gene, that, you know. I said, listen, in merchandising, where's that money going? They're putting it in the savings accounts. I said, you don't even own your merchandising business. Just your manager and your secretary owns your merchandising business.
If you look at the live album on the inside where Dean had drawn pictures of everybody, I'm the one on the soapbox, you know, and there's somebody standing on the side throwing money. Well, that was Mary Beth from The Office. She was also responsible for making sure I had insurance. So, you know, he knew a lot of money was being thrown away, and we were losing a lot of money here and there and everywhere. And of course, right after the crash, supposedly, I mean, secondhand info for me, was that $1 million was not accounted for immediately in concessions. But Ronnie knew there were problems and that was going to be dealt with. We all knew that. But how, you know, who, how, what, you know, I wasn't privy to any of that.
And what's your plan? I said, the plan is take over, take your management, bring it back, bring it to you. And I said, do you want to fire the management or do you want me to fire them? And he says, so we get a legal team, get legal advice. And he said, I want the lawyer to handle all that because I don't want to, I'm going to be there. I'm going to be in another room, but we're going to have, this is all we're doing legal. He said, because there's going to be a big lawsuit. The management's going to sue. He says, I'm ready. So I set a legal team up that the day after the tour, the fall tour, the day after that tour's over, they were going to come to the office. They were going to MCA, say, look here, this is the new address. This is the new, this is where everything comes to this new headquarters. And I said, he says, you're not ready to be a manager. I said, no, I'm not. I said, I can road manage just as security. I said, number one, I'm not smart enough. I said, Bill Fairs. I'm not sure Bill Fairs wants to travel. Bill's educated, college education, good man. He said, I'm not sure he wants to travel. I said, you don't have to travel. Bill can do this out of his house. And Ronnie, you're the one who told me to manage a band, all you need is a telephone. I said, yeah, you're right. I said, okay. So he said, everything's under control. I said, yeah, the day after the tour's over, we'll be there in the office. I said, okay, now can I tell the band what I'm really doing? No, nope, can't tell anybody. My wife don't know. Nobody knows until this thing, the hammer falls. Don't say nothing, okay, no problem, sir. So nobody knew. This was 2 nights before the plane crash in Lakeland, Florida. October 18th, we finished the show and we come back for the, after the show's over, get back to the hotel and everything, you know. And we talked again because he was a little jittery about what was fixing to come on down the road, and he was more concerned about it not getting out, making sure that nobody knew nothing. And so then we, basically we just got ready to fly, and then we got up the next day to go to Greenville, South Carolina. And that's when it started, you know, the nightmare on the plane. We boarded the plane, uneventful, like the rest of the boarding the planes, whatever. And so taxiing down the runway, and then as the plane started to lift off, we got up not far, a few feet or whatever, and the right engine, which I was setting right there, the right engine was right there, because we had a poker table back there. I was sitting here, and a ball of fire, blue fire, 15 feet long, come out of the back of the engine, bam, boom, you know. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation like that, but it scared the tar out of me and everybody else. And so I thought the engine blowed up. So I get out of my seat, and they're getting up 52 to 56 degree angles. And so I'm pulling myself to the cockpit, and I get between the door, Walter McQuarrie and John Gray, the co-pilot. I said, hey, turn the plane around, man. The engine blowed up and whatever. And they're fighting the plane to get up. I said, go sit down, ain't nothing wrong with this plane. I said, man, that engine blowed up. There's a ball of fire just came out of it. I said, turn the plane around right now. But land it. And so they said, man, ain't nothing wrong with that engine. Go sit down, strap yourself in. You know, sit down, everything's fine. And the engine was performing at that point. So when we got up to altitude, went back up there, I said, y'all need to turn this thing around. I said, that engine, they said, man, there ain't nothing wrong with that engine. The engine's fine. I said, it backfired, did something, blew a ball of fire out. I said, something. He said, then he kind of got little, John, the Walter McQuarrie guy said, man, look here. There ain't nothing wrong with that engine, nothing wrong with this plane. Everything's fine.
We weren't happy with this airplane. My son had been out with us in South Florida, and we had a problem. The plane didn't want to start. And we actually stopped in Gainesville the day before and let my son off. I had my mom come pick him up because I was afraid for him to be out on it. And, you know, it was, well, we're getting rid of this plane. We're not going to have this. Just put up with it a little bit longer. It's okay. The plane wasn't right. We all knew it wasn't right. And, you know, as a mother, you'll chance things yourself that you're not going to chance with your children. You know, and if there's anything you're not happy with, then don't do it. Cass did not want to fly when we were in Greenville, but she had wanted to go in the trucks and they'd already gone. They went straight from the gig and hit the road because it was a long drive to Baton Rouge. She just didn't want to be on the plane. And I don't know when that came about, if the feeling just grew, but at that point she wanted to fly commercial. And so we checked We called some of the airlines, and there was a possibility of going commercial, but it was going to be close. When we came in, was going to be close to gig time, so, and we had to have permission to do that. So we had gone to, we had talked to the pilots. That was kind of like the first thing we did, and ran into John Gray in the courtyard, and they thought that everything was okay. Both of them, I mean, neither one of them were impaired or anything like that. You know, McCreary was real straight-laced, didn't drink, didn't do anything. You know, he was ex-military and inspired confidence. You know what I mean? You really, and of course they were flying the plane. They felt comfortable, so I didn't really, you know, I didn't have that feeling that Cass had. And we went to Ronnie's room, and he was already mad when we got there. There had been a personal matter, and so Ronnie was trying to sleep, couldn't sleep, and just basically it was, you're on that plane, you know, it's fine, you're on the plane, or you know, hit the road. He was tired. Right then, he was mad and he was tired. So anyway, we were on the plane.
And so the 20th was the day off. We got up after the show in Greenwood, which was a fantastic show. Yeah, I went to check with the pilots in their room, but they wasn't there. So I went down to the front desk, asked them about the pilots, and the girl said they went out to the airport. So I took a taxi cab or a limousine, I can't remember now, after the airport. And they had the cowl thing pulled back, separated or pulled back or whatever, and they were working on it. As I walked up, they put the cowl back on it, whatever you call that thing. I said, hey, what y'all up there? They said, we just checking this thing out. I said, we're gonna get it fixed before we leave. He said, well, we think we got a magneto problem. Got a problem with magneto, and we're gonna fly to Baton Rouge. I said, we got a day off. Fix it here. Then the mechanics flying to Baton Rouge. I said, had a mechanic fly here. He said, no, we're gonna fly to Baton Rouge. I said, yeah, but I'm security for this band. I said, and I want you to have the mechanic fly here and fix the plane here. He said, you don't make them decisions. I said, man, I said, look here. This ain't no car. I said, you got a problem. Fix it here. He said, listen, you don't know nothing about this. I'm the pilot. I tell you what to do on this plane. I said, yeah. I said, we ain't on the plane right now. And I said, you're making a big mistake. He said, no, I can fly this plane on one engine if I have to. Who would be so stupid to try to fly up? He said, listen, I know what I'm doing. I said, you're gonna take this plane up in the air with a problem when you can fix it here. And I said, why you wanna be so stupid? He said, I'll snap my fingers and make one phone call and you'll be off of this plane. It don't make no difference. I said, you're still a fool. I said, to take this thing up with a problem, it's not a car. He said, you say one more thing to me. And I got my pocket knife and I was gonna walk up and stab the tire on the plane so he couldn't go up with it. But at between 50, 60 feet or whatever it was, I'm thinking, if I do that, that tire's going to explode because it's got so much air pressure on that airplane, it's going to probably blow my head off or kill me or mess the tarmac up, be sued or something. I turned around and come back, I said, I put my pocket knife back in my pocket. I said, man, he said, listen, don't you say another word to me, I'll take you off of this plane. He said, I know what I'm doing. I said, there's a whole lot of people on this plane that I'm responsible for. He said, I can tell you again, I'm the pilot. I'm responsible. I know what I'm doing. You do your job, I'll do mine. I said, you're a fool. And I walked away. What it all boils down to, okay, we got a night off. Would you rather have the night off in Greenville, South Carolina, or have the night off in Baton Rouge, Louisiana? That was the reason that they chose to fly, of the combination of things. They agreed to, okay, well, we'd rather have the night off and party in Baton Rouge then have the night off and party in little old hillbilly, Greenville, South Carolina. So that was thrown into the package. Said, okay, all right. The pilot says everything's good. Don't worry about Gene Odom. The pilot says everything's safe. You can fly. That really ate at my heart for a long time because I should have stopped the plane, but I didn't. And he was dependent on me to take care of him. And that ate me up for years and still does. And at the very last minute, Ronnie Van Zant, hey, okay, pilot say everything's good, let's go. If it's your time to go, it's your time to go. Ronnie Van Zant just didn't know it was his time to go. And so we boarded the plane. But pilot error, pilot ignorance, and having an engine problem that they didn't know what it was. And the FAA report, they checked both magnetos. Both magnetos worked properly. So it wasn't a magneto problem that they thought they was having. It was a problem that they didn't know what it was. But they took it up. They took the plane up.
I was pretty hungover still, and I was like rolled on the plane, and I think Mark Howard, I wanted to play cards, so I think Mark Howard scooted over to the aisle, from the aisle to the window, so I could just fall in that chair, And he got pretty messed up in the plane because he was on the outside, He got his hips messed up pretty good. But I escaped it pretty good with just my ribs and concussion and stuff.
Ronnie had come to me when we first got on the plane. He was up all night the night before. He said, man, I got to get some sleep. I took 2 sleeping pills. One of the girls gave me 2 sleeping pills. I got to get some sleep. So I said, here's a pillow. Get on. There was a table there by the couch. Gary Allen and Kevin Elson was sitting on the couch. Little old skinny table there. I said, lay down in here under their feet, and people can walk to the galley back and forth and won't interfere. So he was over there.
I was over the wing on the right side, and Cass was over the wing on the left side.
We're playing poker, we're flying along there, and the engine starts sputtering, it starts running out of gas. And then they would start spinning, and then when the engine would suck up some fuel and pull the air, and it'd spin the plane sideways, and you're 10,000, 12,000 feet in the air. That ain't no place to be doing no kind of crazy stuff like that. Everybody shook up, carrying on. So I run back forth to the pilots. What going on? I said, and Billy Powell said they were changing fuel tanks. They were trying to figure out why there was no fuel. They were trying to do everything they could do. And so I run up to the cockpit and I say, now, see? And they went, step everybody in, get everybody up, step them in, we're going back a belly landing.
Gene came back and told us to buckle up. We were going to try to put it down. And then some people panicked, and it got a little tense. And
I kicked Ronnie in the ribs. I get up, man. And I went back up there, and I said, see, now you see what you've done? And then it lost its airspeed, and it started coming in lights, and I knew we wasn't gonna make that field. I said, see what you done? I said, now we're not gonna make it. I said, I hope y'all live through this so I can kill both of you. And I ran and grabbed Ronnie up on the floor. He was zonked out from those 2 sleeping pills. I mean, zonked. I grabbed him up and I said, get up, man. I pushed him between Alan and Gary. I said, the plane's crashing, man. He's don't be messing with me, man. I got to get some rest. Come on, man. I pushed him, I strapped him in. I said, man, I'm not joking. I said, I've got his pillow, put his pillow. I said, the plane's crashing, man. Come on, man. So I slapped him. I said, the damn plane's crashing. Put your head down.
there wasn't anything you could do about it, so you just buckled up and prayed,
The night of the crash, I was the fire chief of the Gillsburg Volunteer Fire Department. And when I walked in the house, the phone rang. It was Stuart Hemphill. He was a member of the fire department, and he lived in Gillsburg. He had saw a plane go over his house, and it looked like it was going down. So we just took up the highway towards Macomb. Didn't know really where to go, but when we got to this area, I could see the helicopter.
Then the phone rang, and my aunt called and said, there's a plane going down straight towards your house. So then we realized what that helicopter was doing.
When I got to the woods, it was dark up in the woods, and it was getting dark in the field. And I went to the airplane, I got down on my hands and knees. I prayed to God, help me and help them. And when I raised up and walked to the plane, the first person I saw was the pilot. And he was upside down, and I knew I couldn't help him. I'm gonna say I was the first one after the plane crash. There was nobody there when I walked around that plane twice with me.
You know, it was 6 o'clock, 6:30, like, you know, it was getting a little dark. And at that time, I was planting ryegrass, and they needed a big tractor up here to help move the stuff around, so I brought my tractor up here.
I was in a local drugstore called the K&B, and I heard on the radio inside the store broke in about a plane crash outside of Magnolia. And I radioed for the crash site, and they told me the crash site, directions, and I had them to repeat it 2 other times because it was directing me straight to my family farm. And arriving out here, I saw what looked like a command center being put together. We need to be able to get across the field and across that creek because the plane crash is on the other side of the creek.
When I woke up, I was laid out across the headrest on the left side, which was next to Bill. He had laid me across there. And all I could see, I couldn't move my head. Of course, I broke my neck, but not fatally, and it didn't want to move, so I just was still. And all I could see was a wall of debris and somebody's legs, somebody's short, stubby legs. So I'm not sure to this day who that was. You know, Billy, Leon, Gary, all of them, you know, it could have been any of the 3 of them.
But the plane, to me, was upside down. When it came in for the crash, the front of it, when it hit the ground, to me, it twisted, and the front of the plane, it was upside down now. And when it hit the tree, it kind of bent.
The plane was split open on the side. I think that's where some of them got thrown out. There was a hand sticking out of the crack. And it, you know, bloody hand, I could see that, and I could hear people moaning and saying, "Get me out of here."
It was a lot of drumsticks and guitars and the girl's purse and everything laying around, but
Everything in there, everything in the plane had blood on it. Playing cards, just everything was covered pretty much with playing cards, seemed like. And every playing card had blood on it.
I was the only person thrown out of the plane. Fortunately, when I went through it, you could see these slashes across my hand. That's where I went through the fuselage. So it must have been just enough room for me to get through it. Might have had a point right there for me to go through, you know. And so I was jettisoned up under the wing, and I was the only person burnt by whatever it was. Come to find out from a Navy pilot, it was phosphorus, a flare that those old planes didn't have no de-icing equipment, and they would pop flares to de-ice them planes in freezing conditions. Somewhere on that plane, under that wing, in that wing, was a flare that partially ignited, and that's what melted my eye and burnt my skin leather black. I had to burn holes all in me and melted my eye and burned a big hole in the side of my face.
I just climbed, for some reason, climbed up on the belly of the plane. And when I did, there was a crack. And I stuck my finger in that crack. It was in dirt there. When I did, I poked somebody in the eye. And they were alive. So I told them close their eyes, and I took that hatchet and I started working on that plane.
And then when they came to get us, the fuselage was broken in 2 above me, and there was a piece of the fuselage that was coming down towards my face with somebody walking up there, and I remember telling him, "Be careful where you walk up there, you know, there's people underneath you here," you know, because it looked like that jagged metal looked like it was coming towards my face, you know, and I couldn't move.
And then I was able to peel that fuselage back, you know, shine a flashlight up in there. And the first guy I saw, long hair, full beard, and I was thinking, some of the rest of them same way. A thought went through my head, what's a bunch of hippies doing on an airplane? You know, because back in those days, the hippies we knew, they were broke. They didn't have any jobs or anything like that. So
It was like a jigsaw puzzle. Some people, yes, you picked up, but some you had to move this chair or cut this seat belt or do something to get people out.
but someone was kind of triaging and was separating the injured and the dead.
And there was one guy in particular I was really concerned about. He was sitting there and he had his hand like this on his stomach. And I could see blood just pouring out his fingers, between his fingers. And I'm thinking he's gonna die, bleed to death before we get him out. So it had been several hours. And I came down off the plane and I walked out there and I see the guy laying there. I mean, I was angry about it. I said, what are y'all doing? This guy's gonna die. Let's get him out of here. So we grabbed a gurney and he was the first one we took across the creek.
And we started taking the injured out one by one and went across the creek. And where we crossed had about 16 to 18 inches of water in it. And entering the creek wasn't that bad. But on the other side, the bank was pretty steep. And there were people, plenty of people on the other side helping to get the stretcher on up. And there was some four-wheel drive pickup trucks. And they burst some hay and laid in the back of the pickup trucks to lay the injured in and take them across the field to where the ambulance is waiting.
They sandbagged me and took me out through the break in the fuselage, and they laid us all on the ground. And of course, I couldn't really see anybody else. And somebody came and laid beside me. And I think they were pretty much doing that for a lot of people, just to keep you warm, because it was cold. You know, it was October, Mississippi, in the swamp. And then when they carried us out, I was on a stretcher, and I just remember that it felt like I was gonna fall off the stretcher, because they were having to carry us literally through the swamp and, you know, tripping, I guess, probably over who knows what, you know, trying to get us out of there. And then when they got us to the ambulance, I was actually in an ambulance with Leon and somebody else, and I'm not sure who was on my left, I don't remember. But Leon was hurt real bad, and he was starting to have convulsions. And they were trying to get an IV in my arm, and I remember telling him I'm okay to get Leon.
But as far as the crash, once I left Ronnie's side, that was it for me. I was out there and up under that engine and under that wing, and nobody in the band or the crew knew I was under there. Nobody knew until I pulled out there and Billy set him on the wing because his nose was cut real bad on the bridge of his nose. He was sitting there and he said, "You just crawled out from underneath and you reach at me, and your blood everywhere. And you had a big hole in your head, a big black bloody hole." He said, "I'd push you back." He said, "You'd reach for me and you'd try to say something and I'd push you back." I said, "Well, why you push me back for?" He said, "Because I thought you was going to get a hold of my nose and pull my nose off." I said, "Well, I guess so, yeah."
And of course, the ones that were deceased were kind of set to the side. And kind of after things had calmed down, we said it's time to get them out.
And then we got them all moved out. And that's when I found out who they were. They were gone.
I saw this reporter coming, I recognized her. I see her on TV all the time. They sent me back to you, said you was the first one here. And I said, "Yes, ma'am." But then she the one that told me who was on the plane. And I was kind of ignorant. She said Lynyrd Skynyrd, and I said, "Well, which one was he?" She said, "No, that's the name of the band." And then when she refreshed my memory about Sweet Home Alabama, it kind of come to me. But that's when I found out, but that was hours later.
At that time, I was small, and I was the one that crawled up under it and got the briefcase and things and threw them out to the sheriff. A lot of people said there was a lot of money missing, but it wasn't any up under there. I saw a lot of checks and things, but no cash.
We were just, I say country boys. We thought we was something. We thought we was going somewhere at that time. But whenever this happened, it just brought out who we are. It brought out the best of us. And none of us was trained in any type of first aid or rescue or anything like that. We just all jumped in and done what we felt like was natural.
There was a lot of people there helping. They wasn't up in the plane, but they were outside. They was up here on the highway.
We took care of business that night and got back to our own lives.
I guess I had a lot of blood. My face was pretty cut up, and they weren't sure if I was Cass or myself. You know, they came and asked us, and it went out over the biscuit hour that I was a casualty. So that was what they announced. So my family had to deal with that for a few hours before they found out that I was okay. But first thing I remember is coming through the emergency doors, and the last thing I remember is going back out them. Woke up a couple days later, I guess.
I was unconscious for at least a week. And I remember waking up and looking up and saying, where am I? What am I doing here? you know, and then I looked at my arm and I went, how am I gonna work on guitars? They go, you're not gonna have to worry about that for a while. All my ribs were broken, and I had a punctured lung and a pretty massive concussion and a broken arm and a broken foot and some stick wounds where some tree things come in and stuck me in the arms and just, I guess it ripped the floor out of the plane. I don't know, my feet were kind of weird. I don't know.
I woke up about a month later in the hospital under severe medication and stuff, And in Mississippi, I had a big hole in my head, and it was burns, acid burns. I guess those hillbillies that thought I wasn't gonna make it, I was brain dead. Brain dead before the plane crash.
And I remember Joe came and ran into my room, hysterical, telling me who had not made it. And I think I passed out while she was there. I don't think I just wasn't ready to hear that.
One day I just said, well, nobody was hurt any worse than me. And they said, well, yeah. I went, well, who? And they said, well, Dean died, and then Cassie, and then Steve, and then Ronnie. And I went, it's like somebody punched you. It's like, it's over.
I only started remembering things when they got me to Jacksonville, started doing the plastic surgery and stuff. I was coming down off of the whatever narcotic it had me on, because I was, and I started hallucinating because I was coming down off of it. And then after that, I started remembering some things. I was asking about him, and said, well, he's in the hospital. I was asking about Alan or whatever, and he's in the hospital. He's home. He's at the hospital. He's home. And I said, where's Ronnie? He's home. You see, you get out. And so I got to the hospital, and my girlfriend, Karen Gray at the time, I think it was just me and her. She was taking me to Ronnie's house. We're going to see Ronnie. And so going at Orange Park out there, I'm expecting to go into his house. She pulls into the cemetery. And I said, what are you pulling here for? She said, you coming to visit Ronnie? He's right over there. Whew. That was rough. I didn't know he was dead at the time. And he was in a temporary mausoleum. Temporary, because Judy had ordered him a big fancy mausoleum. Wasn't there yet, and he didn't have no name on it. It was just blank. And it took me a while. It just 40 years actually. I couldn't believe it. I mean, and. Well, nobody told me. She said because they didn't want to upset you in the hospital or whatever, And to find out like that, you don't want to find out your fishing buddy is dead, gone. It's still a shock, after all these years. But that's how I found out,
That tore him up. Really did. I see how sad he is. They've always been real close. He's still real close to him. And I could still see the sadness in him. He still has nightmares of that crash.
The last thing I remember was slapping Ronnie in the face. I was hearing somebody say trees. And what's good about that is my voice was the last voice he heard. I think Ronnie's mistake was, I'm 100% sure. I wake him up from a fog telling him the plane crashes. He's not knowing the plane's crashing. And so I'm sure he unsnapped his belt, because for him to be put in that position where he was at, where he passed away at, he wasn't in the seat. When the plane hit and crushed so hard with that 15 tons of force, it twisted the couch that they were on up, and Ronnie was jettisoned on top of that table. He laid on underneath everybody, and he actually asphyxiated. He was knocked unconscious and never breathed again.
We had actually been on a separate policy as the Honkettes. I didn't even have insurance. We were being moved over to the band policies, and things were being changed, being made more a permanent part. Management had not paid my premium on the Honkettes policy, so it had expired. And I had a 90-day grace period with the band policy. So I had no insurance. I was told that I would be part of a class action suit against the management. And then I was told it was conflict of interest. See ya. So, as it all turned out, I was even short on my Social Security. I had 2 quarters that never got turned in. And we couldn't get any cooperation to even straighten that out. After the crash, bye-bye. And it's been like that ever since.
After the crash, we just kind of all separated because it was like over, and I kind of went up to Ohio to where my parents lived and kind of recuperated there. And I started getting phone calls like, God, I still had a broken arm, and the Cheap Trick called me and wanted me to be their guitar tech, and I'm going, I'm still in shock, I mean, for a long time I was. And I'm like, well, how many guitars they have? And they goes 28. And I went, no, thank you, So then they called me and wanted to know this was in February. The crash was October. By February, I'm living in New York City, and I'm Foreigner's guitar tech for Double Vision. And then the year after that, I was guitar tech for Journey for their world tour. And I was still in shock. I mean, I was really just doing stuff on memory, I mean, it was like, I was an alcoholic, I was a drug addict, Yeah, when your body goes through that much trauma, it's, I went through a lot of stuff, alcohol.
I don't regret not being able to be there. Like Gary came to me after the crash, I was still going through physical therapy, still wearing a brace part-time. There was no way I could go back to work, and I've never really been able to work. I went out with Molly Hatchet just a little bit, did a few big shows with them, but I just couldn't stay healthy. I haven't been able to stay healthy since the crash.
You live from your mistakes and go on, and but you can't look back. But the main thing would be, I'm the kind of person that things kind of stick with you, because I don't like to make mistakes. I don't like to do things wrong, and it seems like everything I've ever done has been wrong. It's the Army. Forget the Army and my marriage to my wife and my daughters. It's a divorce in '77. I wish that would have never happened. But Ronnie's loss, the loss of Ronnie, I will always hold that against me to the day I die, because I should have stopped that plane. But I'm also, I can give orders or I can take orders. And he was the pilot of the plane. He was responsible. He was the man that made the last decision. I knew that. And that's the last thing he ever heard, him and his co-pilot. Don't you wish you was on the tarmac like I asked you to do? 3 seconds later, they were dead.
At the end of my thing with Journey in '79, I called Gary, and he goes, hey, we're putting another band back together. You're gonna come and and be a part of it. And I goes, yeah, I'm on my way. So I went down there, and that's when they started the Rossington Collins band. And then that lasted 3 years, I think. And then Alan and Gary had a little misunderstanding, and Gary took off for Wyoming, and Alan started the Alan Collins band, and I was pretty much the key guy for that one. Me and Mike Sparks kind of ran that kind of thing, and along with Larkin Collins, we had an office over on Jacobs, where we had the old rehearsal place. And Alan was pretty out of it. He was really bad on drugs and alcohol and stuff, so it didn't last long.
You can't be prepared too young. Watch what you sign and make sure you take care of your business. I don't think it was personal. I got told it's not personal, it's business. But just the same, a lot of things got shut out, and we haven't really been treated very well since the crash. And I think that was more hurtful than anything else, is the fact that you thought people were your friends that weren't. That people that had been together and gone through something like that together couldn't pull it together to be right to everybody and treat each other like friends when you thought they were, until the almighty dollar pops up and then you're not. Things that weren't done that Ronnie would not have put up with had he known, but that's life.
I'm 66, and I just kind of grew up here in the last year, maybe. And I said, boy, you're getting old. And then I come to the rationalization. No, you are old and you've been old, all your friends are dying, or, I'm pretty healthy. I don't take any prescription medication, and I quit drinking, and before it affected me. I'm just lucky I got good genes, because I used this body up, man. Seriously. I drank enough whiskey to float a battleship around.
And I have trouble sleeping and everything, and so I'd be in the morning or whatever, or when I couldn't sleep, been up all night, I'd hear this. It irritated me. I was trying to sleep, and I was, irritated, and I kept hearing it. I got up, went around, looked everywhere, went I thought it might be the refrigerator at one time, or it might be the air conditioner, it might be something else. And one morning I was, I told the club bear, I jumped up, what? And fixing to throw something out, and the refrigerator, and I happened to look out the window, and there was an air conditioner there, and that mockingbird looked right at me, and that mockingbird was pecking on that window. I walked up there and I looked right and I went, is that you? I says, I bet it's you. I'm all right. Flew off. Never came back. As long as I stayed there, that bird never came back.
It was 12,000 feet when we fell from the sky.
Wow, gosh, it's been so long. It's, you know, people ask me if it's hard to talk about, but it's been 40 years, so it's really not hard to talk about it anymore, you know. It's, you know, it's just kind of good to see these guys alive. There's not many of us left. Just telling them about when we played cards and you never drank or smoked no pot or nothing. When we would be playing cards and I'd be smoking pot, we'd all be smoking pot, and you would get the contact high, and he'd start cussing at us. Damn potheads! I can't even think. He'd have to get up and leave the table.
It brought my attention, you know, because the pot smoke would be like thunderclouds in there, you know. What would he say? If it's not worth remembering, it's not worth writing down. Something like that. Didn't he say that?
He said, yeah. Yeah, it was something like if it's not good enough to remember, it's not worth remembering. I don't know.
Yeah,
something
like
to
that.
It's not good enough to remember. It's not worth writing
Yeah, I
down.
don't know.
Something,
But
yeah.
I remember that one now.
He always had all the parts in his head.
He could write.
Yeah.
I mean, you give him a topic, I think he could write about anything. He'd just think about something real simple and just write about it. And I mean, just give him a topic. You know, that's kind of hard to do. I mean,
Well, he considered himself a storyteller. He never thought about himself first as a singer, but a storyteller. You know,
He
he's
fed
a
off-
communicator.
he fed off of people what they said, you know, like the truck driver that was always going. Little Jim said, "You got that shit right," you know, and
Jim
so
something, yeah.
you got that right. That's where that song come from.
Little short truck driver.
Yeah.